It's good to meet you. Welcome to C-SPAN. We've got a new book coming out to celebrate the 100th birthday of your father, Ronald Reagan. 100th birthday. And it's amazing because there is such a outpouring of affection and respect towards your father. He has become a really unifying figure in American politics. Somebody who is clearly beloved by Republicans, but that goodwill has extended across the population. He's one of those iconic presidents.
Oh, he is one of those iconic presidents. You know, I write about that in the book. You know, I tell a story about Alec Baldwin.
Yeah.
You know, I'm walking out of the gym with Alec Baldwin, and I stop him, you know, and I say, Mr. Baldwin, my name is Mike Reagan. Jane Wyman's my mother. And he looks at me, and I said, I really had two shots at you. I said, Jane Wyman's my mother, or maybe have to duck and tell you Ronald Reagan's my dad. And he kind of chuckled. I said, listen, my son Cameron has the bear from Hunt for Red October. He said, well, how'd he get that? So somebody gave it to his granddad, and his granddad gave it to Cameron. And I said, enjoy you in Third Rock. Just wanted to say hello. Oh, he says, you know something? I want you to tell your family something. I said, what? I was with some friends last night, and I was telling them how much I miss your father. I said, you missed my father? My God, you disagree with everything he stood for. He said, yes, I did. But I didn't realize till lately what a good soul your father had. And he says, this world is missing that good soul, and how much I wish we had that good soul back, just to make the point of what you're saying.
Yeah, that is one of the great anecdotes, I think, from the book. And it really does express the way that there's been a reassessment. I mean, that partisanship fades over time, and people remember the figure. And the father figure, I think he was at a pivotal time, and that he did adjust the nation's expectations up. And even President Obama has said many kind things about your father as a leader and as a president, which is why I was interested. One of the things you wrote in the book, you said, given the fact that every Republican holds up Reagan as the standard bearer, he is the one piece of common ground that I think unites the whole Republican Party. You write in the book, Ronald Reagan couldn't win the Republican nomination today.
No.
What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that, you know, I had this conversation with Newt Gingrich a while back, and I said, you know, it's interesting that the liberals seem to only need ideology to follow. Conservatives are always looking for someone to lead them. And if that person isn't there, they break into factions. And you get all these different fiefdoms, factions all over the map. And so what I say there is, if Ronald Reagan's never president, and he throws his hat into the ring in 2008 or 2012, who would, in fact, attack him? Because all you could look at would be his gubernatorial years. Sign no-fault divorce. Raise taxes.
Yeah.
Signed an abortion bill. And my God, he was a union leader. Now, so you sit there and you think about the ads that would come out against him. Anti-tax, raise taxes. Anti-abortion, signed abortion. Pro-marriage, you know, no-fault divorce. The attack on him would have come from the right, not from the left. Now, I'd like to think he could overcome that, but that's would have been the argument he would have had to try and get the nomination in his own party.
What does that say to you about the current state of the Republican Party? That for all the talk of litmus tests and conservatism, and indeed you hold, you know, you believe that you had a lot of harsh words for John McCain when he was running for the nomination, that he wasn't a real conservative, that Ronald Reagan would have a hard time getting that today. What does that say to you about the current state of the Republican Party and the current state of political discourse?
Well, the current state of political discourse is the fact that you have, in both parties, you have these little groups out there who are driving the train. If I tell the story, I think I tell in the book about my sister saying to me, you know, politics is like the fuselage of an airplane. You get on the plane, some people sit on the right side, some people sit on the left. People on the right can look out the window and see people on the right wing. People on the left look out the window and see people on the left wing. The people you need to wonder about and worry about are the ones that meet under the plane. And maybe the ones under the plane right now are flying the plane, if you will. And it makes it, you know, very, very tough with the discourse that, in fact, we are in. My father was never one to break into one-issue politics. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that way. And when you don't have somebody to lead, then you have all these fiefdoms out there who've all got a single issues. And if you don't support their issue 100%, their litmus test, then they stay at home. And, you know, then what happens? Is that really good? Well, Ronald Reagan really looked at the process, if you could look at as a football game. You've got the Super Bowl coming up. So if you look at the football game, it's a 100-yard field. Every 10 yards, you get a first down. 10 yards at a time, making first downs, bringing everybody with you is not a bad way to score a touchdown. you're not always going to get that 100-yard pass. And there's too many groups today who want the 100-yard pass, and if it's not complete, they want to go home.
I love both those metaphors. I think they're right, and it gets to, I think, another point. I mean, one of the characteristics of your father's leadership of the Republican Party was this idea of the big tent. Mm-hmm. And even the big tent itself has become a controversial metaphor within the Republican Party today. Mm-hmm. What can be done to remind people of that wisdom, of that bit of Reagan's wisdom as it applies to the current Republican Party? And how does it apply to the current Republican field?
It's like the guy who says, I really love those 7 commandments.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, there were 3 more? Oh, I didn't pay attention to those. It's like Ronald Reagan. You have so many people quoting Ronald Reagan, but not really understanding who he was and what he was. If you will, reconstituting Ronald Reagan in their image and likeness, not what he was. And that's what I try to do with the book, to really understand where he came from. And where there's so many people that talk about what Ronald Reagan would do, in the book, as you know, this is what Ronald Reagan did. And this is what he did when faced with the same issue you're faced with today. This is, in fact, what Ronald Reagan did. I think that's important for people to see that and to understand that he was a consensus builder. He was a coalition builder. He looked at areas of agreement. I talk about in the book, there's one spot in the book, and it really got me because I was doing, I think, talk radio at the time, I'm not sure, but when Michael Jackson died, and Pete King from New York just went off the wall on talk radio, CNN and everything, calling Michael Jackson every word on the planet because he was being honored. And I thought to myself, my gosh, I said, Ronald Reagan would be just horrified by this. Because Ronald Reagan, if you read what's over his gravesite, find the good in people. Yeah. And that's what made Ronald Reagan who he was. Because everybody he ran into, he found the good. On that day, as the President of the United States, if he were in fact to have said a word, he would have had to say a word about Michael Jackson, he would have found the good things that Michael Jackson had accomplished in his life and raised those up on that day instead of calling people names. He never made it personal.
And that has been lost. Mm-hmm. That has been lost. That bit of Reagan's wisdom. As you look at the current crop of Republican leaders, as you look to 2012, every figure is going to be saying that they're running in the mantle of Ronald Reagan. Who do you think understands that totality of Reagan's vision moving forward? Who do you see glimpses of your father in?
I tell you what, I really in some ways try not to, because I almost do a disservice. And I think we do a disservice looking for Ronald Reagan. We weren't looking for Abraham Lincoln when Ronald Reagan showed up. We're simply looking for a leader. And I think what happens is by looking for Ronald Reagan, we're never going to find the next guy because they're not going to add up to Ronald Reagan. Now they all can quote Ronald Reagan. And it's like, if you can quote him more than I can quote him, then you get the nomination. And I think about my father who, when he brought us in, really spoke to us in parables.
Yeah. It's a great point you're making. About,
and he did. And I got that from Bill Clark. Bill Clark, who's been a dear friend for years and judge was a dear friend of my dad, served with my dad. And we talked about it. He talks in parables, where today we have too many politicians speaking in sound bites.
It's a great distinction. Yeah.
And so what you have is you have a guy who says, okay, how do I get to the sound bite? And it's nothing, no meat until you get to the sound bite, and then they hope it's on the 6 o'clock news, and they wonder, why doesn't anybody follow me? Well, because you really gave them nothing to follow. Ronald Reagan gave you something to follow, and you understood him. Whether you're Pope John Paul or you're the kid on the street, he treated you equally and gave you the same amount of time. I go up and meet people all the time. They say, when your father would walk into a room, if I could do this, you know what I remember about him? I said, what do you remember? He reached out his hand, and he did this.
Yeah.
He used both hands. I'll never forget that. Ronald Reagan did it because he really meant it. It was here. He didn't have to make it up.
There was an authenticity that no question, I think, reads and read. And that, maybe that's what Alec Baldwin was getting to, about the quality of his soul became evident, and at a time when there is a lot of fronting that goes in our politics. But one of the interesting things, and you did refer to it, is Reagan was even, I think we forget, controversial at the time, not just in a partisan way. I mean, 149 states, but was deeply disliked by the left. But in some of my research, I came across quotes like this. He sounds like Winston Churchill, but acts like Neville Chamberlain.